Hey, it's still August. CNFers and the frontrunners striding into the dog days of summer. Been getting nice texts and emails. The book being out 3 months now. And if you can, turn those texts and emails into online reviews, please. I'm not going to go read them. I haven't looked at Amazon or anything. I don't know how many are there. I don't know the makeup of them. I just know they matter. And guess what? The audio magazine is coming back. Issue 4. Call for submissions. The theme is codes. The Mandalorian and his kind live by a simple code, always punctuated by saying, "This is the way." What codes do you live by? What codes were you at one time or another told to live by? Do you admire codes in singular devotion, or do you feel unfairly shackled to a way of life? Has a code led you to the right path or down the wrong? Essays should be no longer than 2,000 words, which is roughly a 15-minute read. Bear in mind that in the end, these are audio essays. Write accordingly. Email submissions to me with codes in the subject line to creativenonfictionpodcast@gmail.com. Original, previously unpublished work only, please. Deadline, October 31st, 2025. There is cash on the line, so send me your best fully formed pieces. And consider becoming a patron to help put money in the coffers that helps put money in the pockets of writers.
She said something like, if Bart Simpson had a realistic nose, like that'd be terrifying.
Oh, man, I've been real lazy lately. Hey, I'm not known for a great work ethic. It's the Creative Nonfiction Podcast, a show where I talk to primarily writers about the art and craft of telling true stories, tellers of true tales about the true tales they tell, yada, yada, yada. I'm Brendan O'Mara. Listen, I'm not happy about it either. For episode 485, man, we're getting close to 500. It's Patrycja Humienik. She's a poet, and her debut collection is We Contain Landscapes. And it's published by Tin House, Portland-based. Patrycja is the daughter of Polish immigrants and is a writer, an editor, and a teaching artist. You can follow her on the gram. I'm just going to spell it at JEJ_SEN. Yep, just do that. Type that in, and you can follow her. I'll list her bona fides in a sec. Show notes to this episode and more at brendanamara.com. Hey, there. You can peruse hot blogs, tasteful nudes, and sign up for my 2 very important newsletters, the flagship Rage Against the Algorithm and Pitch Club. Got a flood of new subs after issue 3. Let's keep it going. Let's keep doing it. Gonna have one with Cassidy Randall coming up and Justin Heckert and more. Maybe book pitches, agent pitches, radio pitches, doc film pitches. Yeah, you thought it might have just been writing. No. And it'll never cost you a dime. All I ask is for your permission, for your email address. I will never spam, because platform is currency. Both are first of the month. No spam, like I just said. Can't beat them. And you can also elect to check out patreon.com/CNFpod to throw some dollar bills into the CNF Pod coppers, which helps with the audio magazine. But you can also earn some FaceTime with me, if you dare. Sometimes it's just nice to talk things through. Check it out, friend. Helps keep the lights on here at CNF Pod HQ. And damn it, there they go again. The lights just flickered. Shit. So Patrycja and I had a nice jam session. Man, that's really fun saying her name. I really like that. Trusting the path, the magic of revision, weekly writing rituals with her work wife, tension and textures, and writing without the pressure of publication. Some really rich stuff. Her work has appeared in The New Yorker, that rag, Gulf Coast, Poetry Society of America, and many others. She works between borders of disciplines, language, body, art, activism, conflict, transformation. She's a true artist, man. You can learn more about her at www.patrycyasara.com, PatryCjasara.com. Or just keep listening to learn more. Parting shot of ridding oneself of all the fucks. So cue up that montage, producer Kevin. Huh.
The writing part is where the magic is for me.
The kids these days.
There's a difference between losing and being a loser.
I either work on it or I allow it to torture me for a really long time.
This is going to have to interest somebody somewhere other than me.
I think sometimes a fun jumping off point, and be it poetry or memoir, essay, narrative journalism, is just getting a sense of the writers or a piece of work that kind of lit you up and turned the world from like black and white into color, that made you want to pick up the pen in the first place and then dive into your particular genre of choice. So like for you, who and what might that have been?
I love when I've heard variations of this question, how different answers will pop up in my mind. The thing that came up right away for me was this poem by E.E. Cummings, who I can't say is like even one of my favorite poets or someone that I extensively dug into, but when I was like 13 or something, I encountered this poem by E.E. Cummings called Since Feeling is First. And it was such a sensual poem. It has such a play with punctuation and capitalization, as he's so known for. Just wild things were happening in that poem. And it was in school, I think. And I have this vague memory of people being really troubled by other students, feeling kind of stressed out by the wildness of this written piece and trying to figure it out, and having this strong feeling like, ooh, there's something I like resonate with here, and I'm not really worried about the things that I don't get or understand. I'm like really intrigued by that mystery, and then the wildness of the punctuation and like a single parentheses, I think, in part of it that isn't ever closed. All of that in my mind as a young person was just thrilling, and I think gave me an insight into, or the sort of uh-oh feeling of like, whoop, I might be really into this writing thing really early on. And I think even earlier than that, though, I was exposed to poetry real young because I was going to a Polish Saturday school. My parents immigrated from Poland, and I had to go to school like every day of the week. And I was having to memorize poems like real young. So I think the genesis is probably earlier than that memory, but that E. Cummings poem comes to mind.
You saying that like uh-oh, kind of like the bug bit you in a way that it doesn't relent. It just has you in its jaws. It's so, I love that you brought that up, because I was listening to an interview with Richard Russo, and he had this quote that I wrote it down in my notebook, and it's very apropos. And he said, that's the thing about art that a lot of people don't understand, is that when you're bitten by the bug, it generally happens at least a decade before you're good enough to do anything about it, anything productive. And when you hear somebody like a Richard Russo talk about that, and like you got the bug in particular at one point with that poem, how did you endure the that period of building the skill to get someplace skillful where you could publish?
God, I feel like I'm still enduring that. Like it's this sort of ongoing thing where I'm not sure I wonder if I'll ever get to a place where I feel like my work and ambitions for the work and daydreams about writing and art making ever meet my taste. Like I think it's this that I keep getting bitten or something. It's like a recurring bug. And so from the earlier part of that story, though, and thinking about like my youth and like loving writing and sort of being obsessed with it and trying, but also questioning writing as a path at all. I think some of it wasn't that I even skillfully endured or was like, I didn't have the foresight to always know to be patient. I was just sort of forced to through the journey of life, or through times when I'd maybe have an existential question about why I write at all, and all the disappointments that a lot of writers, I think, face in the journey of sort of realizing like, oh, rejection is a part of this, or just being forced to be patient more than having some kind of approach to it that I can articulate, other than maybe in my 20s when I turned away from writing for some time, or thought I was turning away and pursuing other paths. I think that was kind of an important part of it in a weird way, like having to tell myself like I'm not gonna obsess about publishing anything. I'm not even going to force myself to write at all. And I needed to take this break. But really, when I look back at that time, I was still like writing and reading and really engaged, but I wasn't identifying strongly as a writer. And I had to have that journey for myself to live in the world in different ways and then to just be pulled back to it. And sort of fall in love with it all over again. And that was for me the necessary to accept the time, the collaboration with time that it has been, if that makes sense.
Sure. What were the conditions of your life that forced you to turn away from writing for a time?
I guess that's making me realize, I guess it was a choice too. I think there are material realities too. Like I didn't have family I didn't grow up in like a literary family per se. My parents were undocumented for a long time. I didn't have like a model of what a writing life could be like, and maybe could have done better at seeking that kind of mentorship out. But I think I was just like, dang, how do you make a life in this thing? I don't know how to do that. Then I was also sort of asking that question of like, why poetry at all? And it was later that the famous, often quoted translation of Wisława Szymborska, a Polish poet, this quote about, I prefer the absurdity of writing poems to the absurdity of not writing poems, that kind of like saved me and brought me back. Because I think the conditions were also just this mental state where I was grappling with like, does this matter? Does this work matter in the world? How can I also put bread on the table and like pursue this? And so I went after other things. I also am someone who loves so many disciplines and have a background in different art forms, have this varied work history. And I think it took me a while to realize like, oh, writing is capacious enough, poetry has enough space for that, all kinds of genres have space for me to be like an interdisciplinary thinker actually, and that's an asset, not necessarily a distraction even. And I think it took me a while to just integrate the different sides of myself.
Yeah, you talk about having to put bread on the table, and that's always something I like peeling back a little bit on the show to maybe appease some of the shame people feel about maybe having that day job they're not really proud about that helps subsidize the art they want to do, if they so choose to eventually maybe have that art be their bread and butter. But sometimes that day job that helps interface with the public in a different way is actually very informative to doing good art and good writing. So just for you over the arc of your career to date, how have you managed that balance of making the money so that you can do the art that nourishes you?
I wish I could say that I made really savvy like financial decisions, or that like I even was a person who even took some like evil corporate job and now has like very much, much less debt or something. I guess I have always grappled with this very question and still am, because even the stuff that I took on, the roles I had where I worked in like equity and justice in a university, I did various dance things on the side and some freelance like interpreting a long time ago. All these different side jobs, all of them were following my passions or interests, and unfortunately, my passions or interests don't often correspond with making a lot of money, or so it has been so far. And so it was more that I kept grappling with that question, but never being able to fully choose to do the thing that would just materially sustain me. Like the way that my brain works, I have to be really interested in the work to some degree. And so I kept sort of ping-ponging between trying to center art in my life, then trying to go a different direction and make some money, but still care about the work I was doing, which was maybe my mistake. And so I don't, at the same time as I say mistake, I don't actually believe that. I so believe that our paths I try to trust my timing and the journey I've had. But I think I want to be honest about, for listeners that maybe have struggled to figure out that balance, that it is a struggle, I think, in the realities of our time. Like we really are in a time where it's materially expensive to be a person at all and to be an artist and writer in the world. And I'm still engaging with that question. And it's part of why I left a 9-to-5 job and went back to school for a funded MFA. Even when I already had the book under contract, a lot of people were surprised in my life because they sort of associated an MFA with this time to work on a first book. And I was like, well, the healthcare and time to write and get to teach and work on my next book sounds amazing. And so that is where I've just landed, as I just finished that program. And so I've been reflecting on this very question again. And I'm a freelancer right now and finding those challenges. But I think I've just come to a point where writing and art making have to be the center of my life. Otherwise, I just won't be well. And so I'm learning how to do that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I just heard you say a moment ago, just kind of on this path or this journey that you're currently on, and maybe that path that we're on isn't maybe the as fast a track as we would like, or fast as we'd like as compared to what we perceive others are doing, which gets us into this comparison trap, which poisons the well of our own creativity, productivity, if you want to use that word too. And just, just for you in the lane that you've been traveling for years, how have you wrestled with the comparison trap? It's something I've wrestled with, but I always love getting a sense of how maybe it's affected you.
Yeah, that makes me think of a quote I keep really close by on my desk. Like I can turn and look at it right now. It's the Toni Morrison in an interview, I believe it was. Toward the end of it, she says something like, not paying close attention to what others thought my life should be like. And I just love that reminder of like everything about the language of that, like really considering where we put our attention. If we are putting so much of our thinking on other people's ideas of success, of how to be a writer, of how to be anything, how to be a lover, if we're so consumed by and putting our attention toward other people's ideas for that, it can be really dangerous to our own life, to making a life, to writing. And so I'm really trying to get curious about like, what do I want my life to look like, and how do I actually hear that and cut out all the other noise, which is really a lot harder than it sounds, because for so many of us, we've grown up with ideas that just get reiterated in institutions, organizations, media we might consume. Like there are constantly shoulds surrounding us all about how to be, let alone how to write. And so I think I have just had to, first of all, in my relationships in my life, like find the spaces, the relationships, the people where that's really a shared value, is like letting each other be as we are, being really curious about each other as we are. Like that's, relationships for me are such a part of art making, of writing, where I actually don't feel like I write alone at all, and that I'm in conversation with so many brilliant thinkers who are so themselves. It helps me do the same, and then allows me to like engage more richly with the creative research I might be doing. And it's really conversation that's been such a portal for me to write. And so relationships are a key part of that. And then also just like practicing in my days, making choices that are actually my choice, which again, it like sounds so simple, and the way that Toni Morrison puts it is so clear and simple. And then I'm like, wow, this practice is ongoing.
There's a line, we'll talk more about your book later, but and some of the lines that I sometimes highlight, I think there are some greater themes like that to tug on. It's from the poem Holding Ground, and I just circled this one line, that the skaters in the parking lot are versed in failure as a practice. And I love that, because we can just extend that and extrapolate that to just about anything. And through this line of work, there's so much failure and trial and error. And just for you, just how has that played out over the course of your writing of essays or prose and certainly poetry?
Mm-hmm. Wow, if I think about it with prose, it's so easy to think about failure, because essays are so hard for me. I've been thinking about how I want to step into more prose, and I'm working on some fiction these days and sort of trying to work on essays. But I think the way my brain works, I'm still learning how to bring the part of my brain that can be so fragmented or really image based, or these qualities that I know how to weave in with my poetry, that I'm still learning how in the prose realm. How do I bring my obsession with like sound and image and all these elements that do matter in prose too? How do I bring them to the fore, and also, like write an essay that someone can like follow along with? And so when I think about failure and prose, it's like it's every time I try to write prose, I feel failed in it. But it comes back to the last thing we were talking about, though, which is also like, what do I think I'm trying to write like, or who am I trying to sound like, and why not lean into maybe my own like idiosyncratic way of writing? And so I think, across genre with writing and thinking about failure, I love really trusting the magic of revision and the collaboration of time that writing is, and like what, instead of thinking about it so much as failure, just like this ongoing experiment. And someone that jumps to mind, who's actually based here, Linda Berry, is this iconic writer, cartoonist, teacher here in Madison, who I took a class with during my time in the MFA, and she was highly recommended to me. I don't draw, and so I was really intimidated to take this making comics class. But it's so many writers have recommended it, and for good reason, because she is so much about this rigorous play, like so much generating. It's so intense how productive that class is, but it's also silly. Like you enter that class, no one knows each other's names till the end of the semester. You take on a different name. There's like a great playlist she has going. There's candy. There's all these drawings in the room. It's kind of like chaotic and inspiring in that space, and visually chaotic, but also very neat and well set up for the work that we're going to do. And you're sometimes drawing with your eyes closed. And I say all this to say that kind of rigorous play feels like a new lens on failure, because so much of the time, is failing to draw like a realistic depiction of XYZ. But then, she said something like, if Bart Simpson had a realistic nose, like that'd be terrifying. And so how do we like actually lean into what's maybe, the failure might be actually our imagination of the thing, or our attachment to how an outcome should be. And it's maybe like the frame of mind, not like the process itself is actually so vital, and experimenting along the way is part of it. And so I think some of it's been a reframe, a willingness to keep trying things and not see that as, oh, I'm trying things to trudge up this hill, but I'm actually trying things out to get to like a richer place, or to have, maybe, dare I say, some like fun and pleasure in the process. I know so many of us writers are like, oh, we hate this. And sometimes there are days where I hate this, but I'm also like, no one asked me to do this. No one asked me to be a writer. And so I sure as hell need to find some pleasure in this thing,
Oh yeah. Well, I love hearing you talk about that class, and also this interdisciplinary nature of a creative life, and how, you've experienced. It sounds like, you do have kind of an interdisciplinary creative life. Is that has that been your experience?
It has. My study of dance since childhood has been a huge part of my writing, in simple ways too, like just trying to feel my feet sometimes while I'm typing. Be like, oh yeah, I'm not just a head. I can feel my feet on the ground. Whenever I'm teaching, students indulge me in trying different somatic experiments, and sometimes just visualization and locating different body parts, and just trying to realize and remember, like, we have a body when we're writing, and it can be so easy on a computer for me to forget that. And I think dance has been such an important creative education for me that I still rely on for writing, whether it's also just like taking a break to roll around and just like get out of my head a little bit. Making dance works. It's been a while. I feel more distance from that, but the memories, those experiences, and thinking about how collaborative they were helps me sometimes to reframe or try new things with writing, and to still like lean on other writers and artists in ways that came more naturally as a performer, and figuring out the ways that my writing life can also be like that. And that can look like something simple, like Weekly with a brilliant writer Gabrielle Bates, who's also my pressmate and bestie. We have a weekly writing ritual that we do on Sundays. Actually, I got to get into that Google Doc later today. And just having things like that where I remember that this is, like you said, it's the heat, the spark, all of it comes from actually many different wells, that you were using the word well. And so I think I have to remind myself of that, though. Even things like loving music and having even music on, thinking about the environment I've created to write in is something that I'm trying to reconnect with lately.
Tell me about this, your sort of writer bestie in this sort of date you have. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so Gabby and I, we publicly call each other art wives, and I think it's really sweet to lean into that sort of like romance of friendship and partnership that different relationships rooted in writing can be, and in art. So it's something that I wish for everyone, if they want it, of just like finding the people in your life who you can like deeply nerd out with about the work. And so I think, her and I for years have tried different experiments. For the last year before this newest iteration, we had these 7 questions that we would both respond to at the same time on Sundays. And it was kind of inspired by Banu Kapil, who's got this book called The Vertical Interrogation of Strangers, and has these very chill questions. I think I have it near me. If I do, I don't want to misquote them, but one of them is like, who is responsible for the suffering of your mother? Things that like are just so intense. That she interviewed all these women. I can't find the book, but she interviewed people in 3 different countries, created this book. Highly recommend people check it out, The Vertical Interrogation of Strangers, even just for that list of 12 questions. That is very fruitful to write into. And then Gabby and I made our own 7 that eventually in this ritual became 8 later on. And we would just both respond to them every week. And it was pretty wild to respond to the same set of questions for a year. Our newest ritual is different now, but we did that for about a year. And it was great because there were times where I definitely didn't feel like writing. And so at least I had done this little thing, this little response. And sometimes I was just like, would literally write like, I don't want to answer this question today, still like, and answered one of our questions was, what should be done with your body when you die? And it was really intense to have to answer that question every Sunday. Like, it's very classic 2 Scorpio poets. We would do that, it's very, very silly. But I think that those kinds of things, like creating something with someone whose mind you adore that you repeat, can be really interesting. And so that's one element of our friendship and art partnership, where we try to stay in kinds of creative conversation together.
In the essay you wrote, I think it was like a theme of solid objects, where you wrote about like this vase on blue vase that you got in Chile, or is that where Neruda is from? Chile. Anyway, this thing you wrote, you said the vase is essential to my creative practice. I'm not sure any object is, so much as it reminds me why I'm writing, why I make art, what moves me. The why isn't fixed. And that why isn't fixed really struck me and really stuck out to me. And I wonder, just with when you bring that why to the page, how has maybe your why evolved since you started writing?
I forgot about that little essay. It was years ago that I wrote it, and I'm so glad that it had that wiggle room in it, because I'm always terrified to make some great claims. And, I think that evolution is really necessary for me to feel free, to give myself room to disagree with myself, to evolve as a person, to grow. And so, yeah, I love thinking about that and tracking that. There's something about now being on the other side of releasing a book into the world. And it's really timely you ask this question, because it's like I can't take for granted that the conditions, the obsessions, everything that made that book happen, it's not the same anymore. Like the way that other books are going to happen as I'm writing now is coming from different questions. I have changed. I mean, that's the hope too, right? Like writing the book, I asked for that. Like the book changed my life. Like writing it wrote me into a new life. Like that's my hope. That's the intensity level I go for of writing books. And, there's so many brilliant thinkers have said something to that effect. Like Helen Sixu says really intense things about like only writing the things that you're terrified of, and like that sort of mandate of it's going to likely change our life to write, like to really go in to the things that we're supposed to write on this planet. And it's a hard thing to do to write and make art at all. So I definitely want it to change me, but then sometimes I'm scared of that journey. And so I don't always know the why. I can't always articulate it fully, but I can't, it's like you said at the beginning of the conversation, like the bug bit me or keeps biting me anyway. So like I can't get away from it. And then I kind of uncover some of the why in the journey of writing. But I think lately I have been thinking about how writing, lets me have that experience though of like even tracking growth, and people talk about poems sometimes as like you can see the thinking across the page. I see that with essays that I love too, like how you can witness someone. I mean, especially this is so true for nonfiction. I feel like people let you in on their very thinking, and that's such a dreamy, weird space sometimes to watch how a person changes. I think a lot of us are really like compelled by that. And so I'm sort of figuring out my latest why. And I think the problem too is like I don't have enough of a why not. Like there are times where I'm like I this keeps choosing me, and it's so hard. It only feels like writing gets harder. I don't know if you relate to that.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. The more I've been in this mess, it does not get any easier as certain skills get more and more refined, and maybe you get a bit more economical in terms of what you're able to impart on the page just from a pure skill point of view. But for some reason that invites more difficulty, and I don't know why that is, but I guess it's just you get more. The better you get, the harder it gets. But as good as you might be getting, it's inviting more challenges. So I guess if it's getting harder, you're getting better, I guess.
Well, I hope that's the case. I guess I should be clear too to say like there's so much I don't know, but I do know this, and it's that I want to live and love better, and that we sure as hell have to figure out how to do that. Like the world is demanding that of us, and I think that whether it's the right tool or not, writing is one of the tools I have for figuring that out.
Yeah, is that central now, like maybe part of your why now, just given our culture, is that what poetry is demanding of you now, that degree of that sentiment?
Yeah, I think that writing, I'd say poetry in particular, but I'm sure, I mean, I would love to hear from all the brilliant minds you've had in this podcast, the people I could learn more from about nonfiction, and genres. Such a differences between the genres are you can argue about how different they are really. But because I'm more familiar with poetry, I'll speak from that place where there's a demand, there's an invitation to really pay attention and get really detail oriented too, like about the placement of a single comma. You can spend so much time thinking about punctuation and these deceivingly small things, and really contemplating word choice and all of that, and how a word can be a portal into so many different ways of thinking. It has its own, etymologies are so fascinating to think about how words change over time. All of that demands patience that our world doesn't have a lot of space for. Like, I think it's very counter to the way that we are encouraged to rush through the days, the sort of illusion of urgency in our world that's ever increasing, in my view, and is really detrimental to our own processing, critical thinking, our ability to like use our imaginations at all, which I believe so much in. And I think there's an attack on our very thinking, on our minds, that's really has detrimental consequences to relationships and the whole planet. And I really believe that. And so I am not here to get on some soapbox about writing as the single answer at all. And everyone's journeys are different. But for me, that is a method, really attending to language, which I see as like a material of our lives. We use it all the time. It uses us all the time. And so I think I want to be discerning about my use of language and want to use that as a tool, even though I also am aware of its limits.
In that same essay you wrote, you cite this one poem from Nicanor Parra, and the last line of a particular stanza was, "You have to improve the blank page." And I like what you say after that. Not everything I write is an improvement, and I wonder if that sentiment contributed to my not writing much poetry for years after my semester there. In recent years, I've been practicing the giving myself permission part. And I think, that meditation on it is like, you might put a little too much pressure on yourself. If the blank page already for a lot of people, and that blinking cursor is already enough pressure, and then you're like, you have to improve the blank page. It's like, fuck no. It's like, come on, I just want to make this thing filthy. I got to improve it now.
Right.
Like, what the hell, man? And so I don't know, just unpacking that sentiment. How have you maybe given your permission to not improve it and to just fuck around with it?
I need to hear this right now because I am going to remember that orientation to the writing that I want to do in the coming seasons. And it's a constant giving myself permission to do that, because I think that I can get in my own way of getting too obsessed with reaching some, desired place with the writing that I definitely won't get to in the first draft or first couple drafts or few. And so I think with the book, when I think about making this book, I just needed to write those poems. I kept obsessively revising them. At some point, it wasn't even like, it just felt like this need. And I love that. Like, I love that it just wasn't even a question in my mind I don't think I got in my way that much, especially in the last like couple of years of making that book. I had this drive to work on it, where then I didn't obsess over, well, I did obsess. I'm trying to think about this, but I obsessed in a different way. I was really in the actual language itself, and I wasn't thinking about like, oh, this has to be good. I was trying to figure out what it even was, and I was trying to push it in different ways, and I couldn't stop working on some of the poems. And then that was like the antidote, just that it brings me back to thinking about like Linda Berry's approach of, you just keep making and you keep trying things and you get excited about the process. It's kind of trite to talk about like the process over product thing, but there is something to lean into there of like really, really finding the pleasure in it, or if there's not joy or pleasure, the satisfaction in like the growth journey of it, whatever people need, for those who aren't motivated by pleasure, whatever it is that you need to have, that's kind of like an arc or experience. And so for me, I think that that's the way that I let myself write at all, because if I just got fixated on the making it better, the sort of brutal Nicanor Parra line, then you're right, I would never write at all. But I have to confess that sometimes I still have that Nicanor Parra dog in me, where I'm like, shoot, I guess I just can't write today. Nothing's coming out, But I think it's like exercising that muscle and seeing it as like, okay, yeah, I do have to show up and try something, and I don't have to show this to anybody, but it's part of the exercising the muscle requirement.
So when do you know you have a poetry collection on hand?
That's a good question, because I've been generating a lot outside of this book. As I mentioned, I did an MFA while the book was under contract, and I had to write a whole nother thesis, and that was kind of brutal to write separate from the book. And I would love to know the answer to that, because I have, like the pages, but I don't feel like they're a book. And so when I think back on the process of writing We Contain Landscapes, it was actually a constant thinking I had a book, and then going deeper into revision and it totally changing, which is why I'm such a believer in the collaboration with time that I've said ad nauseum in this interview, because I think a lot of writers get really fixated on publishing, on getting something out there. There's a lot of urgency, and for good reason. Like, there's a lot of pressures to publish, to get things out there, the opportunities that open up with a book in the world. I really get it. I felt that hunger too. But I'm so glad that I also didn't rush. And even from the process of getting the deal with Tin House, and I had two different options of, there was an earlier date of publication possible and a later one. And I took the later one so that there'd be more of a revision process that I would have time for, because I know myself and I know that I love to keep revising. And like, obviously you can overdo that too. But I think, like, to answer your question, early on, I thought I had this book years before the book was actually done. I was like, oh, this is a book. Yes, I just have a little bit to do and I'm going to publish this. And I'm so glad it didn't get picked up at that point. When I think about where the book was at that point, I was really more attached to just having a book in the world at that point and excited by some of it. I hadn't done the deep work necessary to take that book as far as it could go. And so for me, it's this constant, like, but you need that little bit of like delusion, I think, too, because it was really helpful to be like, oh yeah, I have a book, yes. And to just like have that confidence and excitement. But it would be really mortifying now to think about like the earlier versions of that published. I wouldn't be happy with that. And so I think you need that. For me, I need that mix of like, I can feel something growing. I can feel these obsessions and questions that are just so, I have to keep sitting with them. I feel that pull to sit with them. I feel these poems speaking to one another, but I also have to be patient and let myself uncover.
Yeah, that patience is, it's so hard to cultivate that in the face of like that desperation to want the thing, that have a dream fulfilled, and to table that dream of publication, that result, that coveted result, when, and then say, but maybe it's not ready, maybe I'm not ready. There's such a push and pull there, and a lot of us might rush to get the thing out there, to say it's been out there. But I just love hearing you say like, I'm going to take that later time and give it more gestation. It's so important, but so difficult to navigate and cultivate.
It really is. And it's also that fine line, because you don't want to be overly precious about things. Some writers hold their stuff so long that like they never share it with the world. And I don't want to encourage people to be overly protective in that way, because it might really be something that even a few people like really need to read. And so I don't want to like discourage people from sharing their work. But I think it was important for me to remember too that I could publish some poems in some beautiful literary magazines and still edit them for the book, that sort of thing. Like the revision doesn't have to end. And that happened for me quite a lot, where I still took poems further, even after some folks had engaged with it out in the world to a degree.
In this collection, you play with a lot of different forms and formats in it. Even just the overall shape. One poem is like a little spiral, like a snail shell, and so many others have different just aesthetics. Just eyeballing them on the page, you're like, okay, this is going to be a different visual experience on top of the reading experience. So just, I don't know, just give us a sense of how you think about that and how that reflects the content, as well as, how you want it to just look on the page.
Yeah, it's something that I love about poems, that the meaning making happens on all these levels, like the visual, the sonic, kinesthetic. Like you might have a felt sense from the words that is in tension with, the neatness of the shape on the page, or the even or not even stanza lines. There's all these choices that you can play with that can create tension and texture that I love. And so for me, it was important to have that, especially with a collection that is engaging with questions of like landscapes and place and desire and these very multi-layered ideas. I needed there to be that variation. It's also just how I write. I think form and playing with the shape on the page helps me to get at something. And it's a classic thing with poetry, where thinking about the line as its own world, like the enjambment or not to continue the thought. Like all those little choices are part of the meaning making and the questioning that's possible in a poem. So, I mean, this collection isn't even as and anywhere near as wild as so many poets who really play and lean into like visual and form. It wasn't my intent to go too crazy with that either, though I really admire when people lean into so much that's possible with visual poetics. And I think for this collection, though, with this question of landscape and interiority and exteriority, like playing a bit with the visual felt really true to it, but also not overly leaning on that as the project too.
Another thing, too, like several of the poems are like a letter to an immigrant daughter, and you being the daughter of immigrants, how did being the daughter of Polish immigrants really inform the poems and the way you synthesize this collection?
Yeah, it's really an inescapable influence to think about being conceived in one place and born in another, to be growing up knowing about this sort of mythological homeland and not getting to go because of my parents' status until I was 19. So I had this really like romanticized and fragmented sense of Poland in my mind because I had never been there. I'd seen pictures, I had a lot of family there, have a lot of family there, and didn't go until I was an adult. And so that kind of, it's so inescapable as a literary influence to think about like a relationship to a home and that question of home, and so many children of migration. And really, I mean, any person you could ask on the street, like that word home is so vexed or layered for people. And so then that added sense of place and disjointedness of family I'd never even gotten to meet until I was 19. I mean, that is, whether I like it or not, a huge influence on how I approach the page. And growing up speaking Polish and loving other languages, I then studied Spanish, and just thinking about that space between languages, all of that influenced how I approach writing. And with this book, it was such, I let myself lean into that element of life story, even as I really struggle with being that candid. Is something I admire in like nonfiction writers who just like, I'm like, it's like peeling your skin off, just like sharing the whole, just like going in on the narrative facts of one's life, or narrative fact is a contested word, but like going in like that. I admire it so much and I struggle with it so much, but it was really, to then address other immigrant daughters and people in some of that series of poems who I didn't have to explain myself overly to, and that was the addressee. It was really beautiful for me and helpful for finishing the book, because I was really troubled by the ways that immigration narratives could get weaponized, or like sort of the tropes around them. And there was something really freeing in writing that series and being able to address someone who, as varied as all of our experiences are, really like gets it, like some of the layers that can be difficult to explain. So that element of like leaning into personal life to a degree, but also feeling free to not overly divulge everything, was really vital to me for finishing the book.
Yeah, and when you visit Poland as an adult, what was your sort of intrinsic feeling when you make landfall in a country that you had heard about, seen through images, but had never experienced?
I've now gone only a handful of times, and actually last summer went back for the first time in 10 years, which was really emotional. And I'm trying now to like think back on that very first trip when I was 19, which was a while ago now. And I like wish I remembered more, and some of it's tracked in the book a little bit. Like there's a poem, Salt of the Earth, where I talk about like the feeling of being underground in this salt chapel in this salt mine with my godmother. And some of that's touched on in the book is just like this awe, the scale of history, the personal history, and the like more geopolitical that just sort of descended upon me when I landed there, and that I'm still digesting so many years later, and that I felt again with this last trip, which is just like an overwhelm, an excitement to even speak that language all day, every day when I'm there, to tap into that part of myself. I mean, it's a return, and it's also not, because it's so new and I've never lived there. And so it's all always just visits, but it does feel like a kind of return to something, even if it's more like ancestral and sort of hard to pin down and just, but it connects me certainly to something much bigger and longer than my own life story, because when I go there, I'm thinking about like generations back. And so that's really a beautiful and overwhelming feeling that I feel when I'm there. And then also it's just, there are parts of that landscape that are so gorgeous to me that I feel such a pleasure in just seeing, and seeing like the deep green of the parts where my mom grew up, the rolling hills there. There's like such an awe still with that beauty. And so even as there's overwhelm, it's like such a delight to go. But again, I'm also troubled by like the ongoing romanticization I have, because I've still only been a handful of times. So it doesn't feel, it feels strange to even talk about it, because I've never been there for more than like, a month-ish or 5 weeks. And so what would it be like to be there in different seasons? I haven't even experienced that. So I find it hard to talk about Poland, but I tried in this collection to even be real about that.
Yeah, and a lot of several of the poems in the book, as are most people who publish collections, have appeared in other literary journals or magazines. And I think maybe someone of a novice might look at where some of the poems are published, like one of your longer poems that kind of has these little resonant echoing things throughout. I don't know the technical term, so I'm calling them echoing things. It's appeared in the New Yorker, and someone from the outside might be like, holy shit, Patrycja is in the New Yorker. She has made it. She is a famous poet. And, the fact is, when we publish things, no matter where, we're still ourselves, and we still feel crummy most of the time. And there's an arrival fallacy to a lot of this. And I just for you, like, what a feather in your cap, and an amazing thing to say, and to be able to put into your CV and so forth. But yeah, how do you wrestle with this idea of like having such an amazing publishing credit, but then it's just like, okay, but the work doesn't stop. I'm still me, and I still pursue it, and it's not like I have made it suddenly. Yeah, does that make any sense?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. First of all, I love the term echoing thing for that. Was a sonic crown, but I'm gonna start calling it the echoey thingy, because you picked up on the echo. Yeah, the sonic crown is such a cool tricky form. And I think that a friend recently, a really great poet, Stephen Espada Dawson, also just released a book recently and was talking about it being at once overwhelming and underwhelming. And I think that's so true of sort of these accolades, these things that one might hope for so badly, and you kind of like expect more to happen, like, ooh, I got a poem in the New Yorker, like suddenly my life is just going to entirely change. I'm like, where are all my bouquets of flowers every day for the rest of my life? Whatever, like this idea that it's going to be this big thing. And then, like you say, you're still with yourself having to show up for the work. Like, I'm, so grateful that poem found a home that could then reach many readers, because that's a really like sort of core poem in the collection, one of the heartbeats of the book. And so I feel so grateful for that. And as you say, like, we just kind of got to go on with the work. Like, all of that is separate. The author stuff, the publication stuff is actually separate from the work. It's just, I have to make space for the actual making, and none of that will replace the sitting down with it, the reading time that's required, the getting curious about the world that's required. Like, it doesn't matter how many fancy pubs or not, like, I still have to show up to the page and to my relationships and all the things that fuel the writing. And so I think it's really important for me to not get too distracted by that, even as I crave those things also just for the material support that I hope for. But for writers also, we find out like, ooh, even these big things, there's not that much material support, so I think especially for poets, I mean, maybe that will change when maybe this podcast is going to help me get my big nonfiction break. So thank you for that. But I think,
Oh, yes.
I think if I can start to, actually successfully write nonfiction for more than like, a few essays. But I think that it's just such a good reminder, like that we have to find a way. I have to find a way to let like the writing itself, other people have said this, like be its own reward. Like how can I let like the making be it and find satisfaction in that, because there will always be the next thing that I don't have and some other way to make myself feel bad about myself as a writer in the world. There's so many ways to feel that, but I think it is really special. There's this like famous Jean Valentine poem that I love called The River at Wolf. And there's a line in there, like, I might be butchering it, but like, blessed are they who remember that what they now have, they once longed for. And just to like really, really sometimes take stock of where I am in my life and be like, wow, me years ago was dreaming of these stressors, was dreaming of these particular things I'm anxious about. And so I have to tap back into that. Not in some sort of like fake silver lining way, like we can all feel our feelings, don't have to like toxic positivity, everything. But I also want to really feel that, to tap into like, wow, younger me dreamed of these things. Let's keep going. Yeah.
But there was something you said a moment ago too about, that particular poem that ended up in the New Yorker, that it was kind of like the heartbeat of the collection. And I think like poetry and poetry collections always reward multiple readings. And in a sense, it is a very alive thing. And, to you, to what extent is, this collection very alive in that very heartbeaty kind of sense?
Yeah, it's such a mystery of writing for me that it's what I love in the writing that speaks to me most, is that you can't exhaust it when there are pieces that you return to reading that you love, that you get something out of again and again. And that's like my dream for this book for readers. And it's thankfully for myself in writing it, I have re-encountered or been surprised by things in these poems that have kept them feeling alive to me, where there are things that have even been mysterious to me or that I've noticed later, or, reading it in a new place on my cobbled together book tour and suddenly feeling like, oh, like noticing things even after publication. That's like a real gift of it and keeps it feeling alive. There are times where I feel less connected to it and maybe let those other voices get in the way, as we were talking about, just the reality of how hard it can be to be a writer and the threats of comparison that can get in the way of really like looking back at it and being like, wow, I made this thing and it's still maybe teaching me something, or I'm maybe looking at, it's allowing me to track how I've related to an idea in a new way. There are a lot of obsessions in that book around questions of devotion, desire, borders that are lifelong for me. Like I didn't end that book and wrap up my questions like, oh, done with that. I'm going to be thinking about those ideas for a long time. And now I get to have a record of how I was digesting them. And I think that that's like the beautiful thing about making books too, is that like then we get to look back and be in relationship to it in a new way, just like with some of my favorite things I've read. When I get to read it in a new era of my life, it's like tracking your own growth in some way, or tracking just how your mind has changed. And I think that that's my hope for writing this book too, is times I look back on it to hopefully not look back on it with like, frustration, but rather to just be really curious about how I was processing things at that time and digesting the world, and who were the influences on me at that time, and all of those things. I can kind of see them more clearly from this vantage now, as it's been in the world a handful of months, and I hope and I'm sure that will keep happening in the years to come.
Oh, very nice. Well, I as I always love to bring these conversations down for a landing, I love asking the guest, you in this case, for a recommendation of some kind for the listeners, just something fun you're enjoying and that you want to share with them. And just anything that might be bringing you joy. So I would extend that to you.
Yeah, I think in the vein of things I've been saying about where our attention goes and my belief in finding pleasure in our lives as a way to sort of fill the well that you've been talking about. I've been really loving attending to the sensuality of food and, I guess suggestion, whether it's solo or maybe with someone that you adore, like having a meal, and this could be as, whether it's going somewhere really special or literally making something at home, even if it's a frozen meal, whatever one's budget allows, to like savor the color, the texture, like audibly enjoy it together, be a little disgusting, like just be like, yes, this is so good. And to like enjoy also witnessing someone that you love taking pleasure in a thing. I think that I've been trying to really like enjoy that also as someone who's had various like digestive issues, and I'm sure that would be thrilling to tell you more about, but I'll spare you the details. But I think that I've been trying to like reframe and think about where I can take pleasure in something that I eat and really like go all the way with like really deeply enjoying and savoring a meal, and getting, for writers, like letting it be a creative pursuit. Like I'll be whisking some matcha in the morning and I'm like, I'm a painter getting my green paint ready for, I'm on the at sea, like I made this ink from the like grasses of whatever, like just to like let ourselves use our imagination. And if it's something that we feel disconnected from, like, contact a child in your life, because they can like borrow someone's child with consent and like learn how to like do a visualization or a play, just like a playing pretend thing, and make like a full sensory experience with food or with something you're drinking. I feel like it can be a little gift for the day.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, the poetry collection was a thrill to read once, and then before our conversation I picked through a couple just to kind of get them into the mainline a few more, and it definitely rewards multiple readings. So just an awesome job on the collection, and thank you so much for carving time on the podcast to just talk about how you go about the work and how you went about creating this wonderful collection.
Thank you so much. Such a pleasure chatting with you.
Thanks to Patrycja. Thanks to you, fair CNFer. You still with me? Like now in the moment and just like in general? You still on the train? Have you not jumped off? It's okay. I've outgrown podcasts. Some people have graded on me, and best of my knowledge, they're still doing their thing. I'm never going away, for better or worse. Don't forget to sign up for my newsletters. Pitch Club and Rage Against the Algorithm. Embeds are at BrendanO'Mara.com. Hey. All right, so I was driving around Eugene, cruising the Ave, as we used to say, in southeastern Mass, and I was thinking how life is all about running out of fucks to give as fast as possible. We're pretty much born with all the fucks we're going to give in a lifetime. Sure, we pick them up. We pick some up along the way, but by and large, we're given all the fucks, and the most enlightened find a way to get rid of them as fast as possible. I remember listening to, I believe it was Taraja P. Henson on WTF. It was a couple years ago, and he asked her how she's doing. She just turned 50 or just early 50s, and she was just like, you know what? I am out of fucks to give. And it just really resonated with me, It takes a long time. You start hearing people in their 50s really lean into it, saying, you know what, I'm out of fucks to give. And it's liberating, right? Some people don't lose them, and it's kind of sad. Like someone I know who's pushing 70 is still like really concerned about being skinny. And it's like why waste the headspace? Like, who really cares? No one cares. I mean, I have my body image issues and dysmorphia and the like. More on that when I run the Mallory Tarpley pod, probably next week. But you start to think, like, why am I letting fill in the blank take up space in my brain? There are certain things in my writing life and podcasting life that still raise my hackles a bit, but I'm getting better at it. It really bothered me when certain people failed to step up and help me with book promotion. People I've helped, people I've platformed. And then to be ignored when I could have used the help. Like, that really upset me. I don't do this for favors or treat it as a transactional thing, but sometimes it's nice to have your back scratched after scratching someone else's. You know what I mean? I think that's the phrase. Hey, book sales, we just crossed 3,000. Now, a few weeks ago in the newsletter, I expressed mild disappointment in sales numbers that were, maybe 2,400, 2,500 or so. I probably wouldn't have cared, but like the bookseller in town that I primarily work with, he was like, oh, that's it? But as long as I'm allowed to keep going and maybe secure another book contract so that I might be able to pay for health insurance, thus liberating my lady wife from a job that's killing her. That's the win for me. Can I keep the flywheel spinning? I'm trying. Yeah, the baby proposal for the next book was sent off a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, I believe, and I haven't rested on my laurels, just like I thought. My agent hasn't gotten back to me yet, and I don't expect to hear back from her for at least another week or two, because that's just how she rolls. But I'm building out the book. I'm doing the research. I'm building contacts. I'm sourcing up. Not dragging my feet on that, like I did with the pre-book proposal, which, like I've said a million times before, it cost me probably 6 months, and I mourn those 6 months to this day because I think I could have made the book a lot better. All in all, I'm starting to reach the bottom of all my fucks. I think there's only a few remaining, and I'm trying to poke holes in the bottom of the fuck reservoir so they can fully drain out. If I can be void of fucks by the end of 2025, just think how light that'll feel. This isn't to say, like, to not care. It's kind of the opposite. I want to care more about what matters. Just like being kind, platforming a diverse swath of voices on the podcast, getting more headliners on the pod, which brings in more attention to the entire festival. I want my worries to matter. I want to be of service. I want to be a force for good. I know I can be a drag at times, a bit of a miserable, curmudgeonly, seemingly ungrateful, grumpy pill. I realize my complaining is annoying. I mean, it annoys me. But I'm not going to hide or tamp down how I feel. That's not being honest, and that's putting maybe a false veneer of performative bullshit that's in service of nobody. And, we all feel like shit most of the time, if not all the time. No sense in hiding that. That's part of being a writer. That's the table stakes, baby. If you're miserable, well, welcome to it. As long as the angst starts stemming from a dry well of fucks given and not fucks to give, I can live with that. So stay wild, CNFers. And if you can't do, interview. See ya.